Hello everyone, I'm Chester44 and welcome to this Let's Play of UruLive. Last episode, we managed to get the final pillar that we were meaning to collect. The only task we have left is to return the 4 pillars to where they were meant to be. But before I do that, I want to go and read through those books that we happen to find somewhere in the ancient city. We just need to open this up and go to it. Let's see, where was it? I think this is it. Yeah, this is it. Just because I want to read through them, and it was going to take a while to read through all of them. I think it's fair. Here's information we have to learn up here. So let's go through all of them. First one we have is on marriage. Let me just take a drink. Alright. Interesting cover, by the way. I'm guessing this was reused or something.
Much more than modern cultures, within Dunny culture, all citizens were expected to marry. In fact, it was even believed that marriage was an important part of a relationship with Yavo, as it taught and revealed the necessary requirements for such a relationship. Both marriage relationships and the relationship with Yavo were described by the same Dunny word, tegan. Literally translated, the word means to love with the mind, and implied a deep understanding, respect, and most importantly, unselfish love for one another. Obviously, the religious influence on most of Dunny culture was very strong, and as a result, marriage was not something taken lightly. It was considered a lifetime commitment, and for a Dunny who could live to be 300 years old, it obviously was not a decision the Dunny felt should be rushed into, and it seems as though it rarely was. Some records point to rare arranged marriages, although for the most part it seems that the decision was up to individuals. Marriage was not permitted before the age of 25, and marriage between blood relatives was strictly forbidden. Though allowed, marriage between the classes was looked down upon. Marriage to other worlders was practically unheard of. I've found certain writings from the 9000s going so far as to call the mixing of Dunny blood with outside cultures a travesty, while others wrote such a child, who marries an outsider, was better off dead. The marriage ceremony itself was not a single-day event, but one that took over 5 days. Attendance to those sections of the ceremony to which one was invited was extremely important, and it was considered a disgrace to be invited and not attend. The event usually began with a small ceremony held on the evening before the first day of the marriage ceremony. The ceremony always took place at the home of the groom or his parents, and was meant to confirm both the bride and groom's decision to be united to one another in front of their immediate family. The groom presented his bride-to-be with a gift representing the confirmation of his choice. The acceptance of the gift by the bride-to-be was acknowledgment of her decision. Immediately after her acceptance of the gift, the bride-to-be was escorted away with her family and not to be seen by her groom until the joining ceremony that would take place on the 5th day. The first day was meant for the bride and groom to spend time with their families. As they were starting their own family, their old family would no longer be the highest priority. Thus, the day was set aside to spend time with that original family. Traditionally, the day ended with a large meal, as well as speeches and blessings from the parents to the child. The second day was set aside for the bride and groom to spend with friends, both married and unmarried. Traditionally, one of the friends would host a large dinner at the end of the day. The third day was reserved for spending time with the soon-to-be in-laws. It was on the day that the bride and groom received blessings from their in-laws, as well as other members of the family. Again, there was a traditional larger meal at the end of the day, marked by speeches from the eventual in-laws and other soon-to-be family members. The fourth day was meant for the couple to spend time alone with Yavo individually. Though many apparently viewed the day as a formality, others viewed it as the most significant of all the days. The day was often filled with prayer, asking for Yavo's blessings upon the event, as well as a time to understand Yavo's desires for their new lives together. It was also considered a time to purify themselves before Yavo. Some chose to spend time with the priests or prophets, while others read the holy books and talked to Yavo himself. The 5th day was the day of joining. The early portion of the day was set aside for physical preparation, while the later part of the day was set aside for the joining ceremony itself. For those who did not have access to private ages, the ceremony usually took place on marriage ages. For the upper classes, the ceremony took place in family ages. All family was expected to attend, as were fellow guild members. All of those in attendance were divided into 2 sides. One side represented the groom, while the other represented the bride. Between the 2 sides, in the center, were a long aisle and a triangular podium. The bride and groom would each approach their side of the podium by walking through their respective family and friends. It was, after all, those family and friends who had made the bride and groom what they were, and the Dunny believed it was those family and friends who should present their bride or groom to their spouse. The priestess usually stood on the 3rd side of the podium. As with most important events, and especially marriage, the bride and groom wore the bracelets they had been given at birth as well as maturity. After the bride and groom arrived to the platform, the father of the bride would remove the bride's bracelets and give them to the groom. The Dunny believed the giving of the bracelets represented the giving of the bride's purity and adulthood to the groom. A short speech often followed the event. The father of the groom would follow the father of the bride, and with the identical procedure, giving his son to the bride. The giving of the children was followed by an expression of both parents of their blessings upon those being joined, as well as all of those present. Symbolically, the bride and groom then switched sides to represent of an acceptance of all the bride's family and friends of the groom and vice versa. Both the bride and groom then handed all 4 bracelets to the priestess. While the priestess led the couple through their commitments to one another and Yavo, the bride and groom placed their hands upon the podium. During the commitments, the couple made promises to one another, followed by promises to Yavo. All were recited aloud to the priestess. The priestess usually reminded the couple that marriage was a reminder of Tegan, to know with the mind, and that their love should always be a representation of their love for Yavo. Following the commitments, the priest would place 2 new and larger bracelets upon the bride and groom. The groom's was placed upon the left wrist, and the bride the right wrist. The new bracelets were meant to represent both the purity and maturity bracelets their spouse had previously worn. The Dunny emphasized that the spouse was now your responsibility to keep pure and knowledgeable of good and evil. The bracelets were meant to be a constant reminder of that responsibility, as well as commitment to maintain the best for that spouse. After the new bracelets were placed upon the wrists, the hands of the bride and groom were wrapped together with a tight cord, covering the wrist and hands completely. Upon completion, the priest placed a ring upon the pinky of each free hand. The rings were symbolic reminders of the entire ceremony, and placed upon the 5th finger to represent the joining that took place on the 5th day. The priestess would then usually remove herself from the podium so that the couple could take her place. Together the couple then walked down the aisle between the 2 parties, and toward the far end of the aisle where a glass of wine waited for them. Before drinking, the couple knelt and prayed together to Yavo. After the prayer, they each drank from the cup, and the 2 sides of the hall merged into one group, often with great celebration. They were now considered joined, and the celebration could begin. Families usually fed all in attendance, and there was typically dancing and music. The couple was expected to keep their hands united throughout the night, as a reminder that they were now joined both in the eyes of man and Yavo. The binding of the hands was apparently meant to be somewhat troublesome, symbolizing that there would be difficult times to their relationship, but that those times did not affect the fact that they were now joined. Following the celebrations, tradition was for the couple to embrace, and the priestess to touch a linking book to them so that they would both link to vacation or honeymoon type ages. Though these vacations were usually short, it was not unusual for the man to not work for up to a year in order to build the new marriage. I should also note that the cord used to join the couple's hands together was also viewed as a sacred item. It seems as though various couples used the cords in a variety of different ways, some using them for necklaces and others hanging them in their house.
That's fascinating. I believe these 4 books are basically talking about Dunny culture and the like. Oh, a lot of reading here. Let's move on to the next one. Maturity! Oh, wow. With the most mature book we could have picked.
Similar to a variety of other cultures, the Dunnies celebrated a child's entrance into reason and maturity. The Dunny believed that true maturity, or the age of reason, as they called it, was achieved at the age of 25. Before that, the Dunny believed that children's minds and hearts were not properly formed. Up until that time, they even went so far as to say it was impossible for a child to truly make a correct decision, as they were too easily controlled by other motives. That did not mean that what they did was not right or wrong, but the Dunny believed that Yavo did not hold them accountable for those decisions. Up to that point, it was apparently up to the parents to judge and protect, and thus another reason society encouraged couples to only have one child at a time under 25. In the ceremony of readiness, the Dunnies celebrated a child's entrance into reason and maturity. At the ceremony, the child was presented with a bracelet of knowledge, also translated maturity. I have to admit, the translation is somewhat poor and makes it sound like a magical or superstitious item, something it did not sound like to them. In fact, it was a fairly serious item. The Dunny viewed the bracelet as a sign of accountability. The individual, once given the bracelet, was expected to be responsible for his or her actions, as he or she had true knowledge of good and evil, and the wisdom to make the right choices between both. Associated with the bracelet were certain rights as well as expectations to behave in a more correct manner. From a religious standpoint, the ceremony of readiness signaled accountability to Yavo as well as fellow Dunny citizens. No longer were parents judged for the actions of their children on a religious level, and no longer was lack of knowledge an excuse to Yavo. The Maker, they believed, now expected much more from them. Though the age of reason was 25, the Dunny did not consider true wisdom to come until much later. With not nearly the fanfare that the age of reason brought, at 125 years of age there was another celebration for reaching the age of wisdom. Perhaps most importantly regarding that status, the Dunny were allowed to become highest ranks of teachers or leaders, Grand Masters or Lords. The same rules applied to women, and no woman under the age of 125 was technically allowed to advise, especially the kings. As well, it appears that a woman's fertility ended around age 125. During the time of the kings, advisors were required for those kings who were under the age of 125, as the king himself had not achieved the age of wisdom. The great king Alcindar was the only king who did not have an official advisor, even though he was under the age of wisdom for the majority of his reign.
Okay, so that's an interesting bit of information. So the Dunny basically, we know they lived to over 300 years old. Yes, they did live a very long time, which explains how Yisha is still alive, even though she was born in the 1800s. And it's 200 years past, which means she did pass that age of wisdom that they mentioned. So they had 100 years between when, geez, and 25 is when they were no longer considered a child. That's much older than most people here, where it's 18 or 21. Jeez. The amount of time before they could drink must have been an agony. Sorry. Next we have, oh god, pregnancy.
Now this is surprising. I can't say for sure, but it seems fairly clear that Dunny women were only fertile for 1 Dunny day every 2 Dunny months. In surface terms, that's roughly only 30 hours every 72 days. If true, it explains quite a few things. First, why there were so few children for a people who lived 300 years, and secondly, the reason behind the rather large celebrations of pregnancy. As far as I can tell, these celebrations were usually limited to family members, although were rather large. There was quite a bit of prayer to Yavo, as well as blessings from the family members. These blessings usually included vows to care for the pregnant woman and child through the coming months. As I have mentioned in other areas, pregnant women were believed to be much more insightful, and as a result, part of the pregnancy experience, although not part of the official ceremony, was using that insight to gain revelation from Yavo. Though there was quite a bit of religious meditation expected of women during this time, I won't go into it here. However, this meditation was expected to primarily guide the woman to her child's future and its purpose, and was taken rather seriously. While pregnancy within marriage was cause for great celebration, the same cannot be said of pregnancy outside of marriage. As far as I can tell, any woman who became pregnant was expected to immediately marry, and any child conceived out of wedlock was unable to join a guild for its entire life. As well, no revelation was expected from such a mother. This was as equivalent a curse to a lower class woman, as her child would not be able to attend a guild of the upper class. As far as I can see, gestation was a full year, 10 dunny months, 290 dunny days, equivalent to 1 Earth year. I have found no records of multiple births.
Well, that was short, but okay. The last one is the class system. Okay, this probably is going to have a lot of information.
Seems as though my first inclination toward class structure was incorrect. Though early on there was little in the way of a class society, such a high ideal faded quickly. By 9400 DE, there were 7 very distinct classes. Elite, the lords and the grand masters of the major guilds. It was possible for private citizens to be accepted, but if so, abundant resources were needed. It was only the elite who owned private libraries of books and the private islands. Quite a few obvious attempts to reach out and unify the classes, although I'm not sure if it did much good. Common libraries, major guild scholarships, renovation of poorer districts, all seemed more political than life-changing. Not surprising, I suppose. Guild members. Yes, it was possible for the lower classes to attend, but it seems by the end the schools were far too expensive and prestigious to allow for such. As a result, the graduates became a class among themselves, and a very high one at that. Upper class. The lowest of the 3 higher classes. Such citizens had succeeded in private enterprise and most likely provide the elite with their banks, pubs, etc. No major guild education for the most part, but enough money to buy their way into the upper classes. Middle class. Mostly shop owners and the like. Able to afford some luxuries of dunny, but still considered far from the elite. Rare but possible for them to own books, as well as private ages. Seemed to make up most of the minor guild enrollment. High poor. The higher class of poor seemed to be made mostly of industrial workers, many of whom spent their time on foreign ages, before it was outlawed, of course. It seems that this class, along with the lower 2, did not own books. Low poor. I can't seem to find a better name for them. However, seems clear that there were 2 classes of poor. These low poor were relegated to their own districts and rarely seen even with the middle class, and never with the upper classes. Possibly used as servants, although that was generally looked down upon. Sub-low. Reference to the least and undefined subclass are found on rare occasions. Not enough data to elucidate.
Huh. So the book spoke of Yavo, who I guess is their god. They've mentioned the Maker several times, who I thought was their god. Perhaps Yavo is meant to be the name of the Maker. That said, there isn't really anything else, any other information around here, so we can go back. There's that mention of the least again. Excuse me. I believe these Baro are meant to be the least that are spoken of. Yisha speaks of them very constantly, almost highly in some cases. And it looks like she's trying to, like, help them out, put them on a pedestal, hold them up, something like that. I don't know. Either way, it does still raise questions. That said, it's interesting learning about the Dunny culture and what they were actually like. There isn't much known of Dunny, truthfully. All we really knew of Dunny was, oh, interesting. You can tell which wedge was supposed to be for Giro and Kima. Yeah. But you don't really learn very much in the previous games. That's basically what this game is about. Sure, there's all this with the pillars and everything with Yisha, but the main goal was to learn more about Dunny, more about their culture. That's what this game is. And it can be interesting. If that's the kind of thing you're interested in, that's what this game is about. That said, I think I'm going to end this episode here. Next episode, we'll work on returning the 4 pillars, and what happens after. We're close to the end of what was originally the single-player experience with the original Uru, though there will be much more that we'll have to go into. That'll be in the next episode, so until then, I am Chester44, this has been a Let's Play of UruLive, and I shall see you all next time.